She thought authority was on her side. A classroom, a routine lesson, and one decision that would expose everything she tried to hide. A black student singled out, accused without reason, his life nearly changed forever in a matter of minutes. But what she didn't expect was how quickly the room around her would shift. In just 5 minutes, the voices she thought were silent rose louder than she ever imagined. What could drive an entire class to turn against the very teacher meant to guide them? It was supposed to be just another day in class. The kind of morning where the air felt heavy with routine papers shuffling, chairs squeaking, and students trying to shake off the weight of a long week. Among them sat Marcus, a quiet, focused student who rarely caused trouble. He carried himself with a sense of calm, the kind that came from knowing education was his path forward. Books neatly stacked, notes carefully written. He was the kind of student teachers often said they wanted more of, but that day something felt different. Whispers floated across the room, glances exchanged when he raised his hand to answer questions. Marcus noticed the stares, but he pushed them aside, determined to stay focused. What he didn't realize was that a storm was slowly building, one he couldn't have predicted, and one that would test every ounce of strength he carried inside. The teacher's eyes lingered on him longer than the others. Every move he made, every sound from his desk, seemed to catch her attention. To Marcus it felt odd, but he tried to ignore it. After all, what harm could come from simply trying to learn? But sometimes prejudice doesn't need a reason, it just needs a target. And before the hour was over, the weight of that truth would come crashing down on him in front of everyone. At first, it was subtle. A sharp tone when his pencil dropped, a glare when he shifted in his seat. Marcus tried to keep his head down, telling himself he was overthinking. But the atmosphere in the room began to change. The teacher's patience with other students seemed. Intact jokes were met with a smile, mistakes with gentle correction. Yet every time Marcus moved, every time he spoke, she made it clear that his presence was different. When his phone buzzed quietly in his pocket, he didn't even look at it. Still, she pounced, demanding to know why he was distracting the class. Marcus's cheeks burned. He hadn't done anything. The whispers around him grew louder, some students smirking, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Then it escalated. She accused him of being disrespectful when he tried to explain himself. Her voice rose, filling the room with tension. Marcus's chest tightened as she pointed at him, painting him as a threat in front of everyone. He had seen moments like this before, outside the classroom, in the news, moments where people like him were labeled guilty before they could even speak. The turning point came when she pulled out her phone. Her words were sharp, deliberate. She was calling the police. The air froze. Marcus's stomach dropped, his heart pounding against his ribs. He hadn't shouted, hadn't broken a rule, hadn't harmed anyone. Yet here he was, a student sitting at his desk, suddenly treated as if he were dangerous. The room fell silent. Every eye turned toward him, some wide with disbelief, others avoiding his gaze altogether. Marcus sat frozen, fear and anger colliding inside him. He wondered if this would be the moment his life was permanently altered, not by his choices but by someone else's prejudice. As the teacher stepped toward the door, phone pressed to her ear, a ripple moved through the class. Students glanced at one another, unease spreading. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. And though Marcus didn't know it yet, those quiet looks would soon erupt into something far more powerful than the teacher expected. The phone call was still ringing when the first voice broke the silence. A student in the back row spoke firmly, almost trembling, but loud enough for everyone to hear. He didn't do anything. Heads turned. Another voice followed, then another. Within seconds, a wave of murmurs spread across the room, turning into a chorus of defiance. The teacher stiffened, eyes narrowing, clutching the phone tighter as if authority itself lived in her grip. But the class had shifted. One by one, students began to rise from their seats. Their voices grew stronger, sharper, echoing against the walls. Marcus wasn't disruptive. He wasn't dangerous. He was simply a student trying to learn. Her command over the room began to unravel. The teacher shouted for silence, but the noise only grew. Phones lifted, recording every second. The very tool she thought would silence Marcus had become her undoing. Fear flickered across her face, not fear of Marcus, but fear of exposure. Marcus sat frozen, his heart pounding, unable to process what was happening. For the first time since it began, he wasn't alone. The same classmates who had once whispered nervously were now standing, their voices steady, their eyes locked on the teacher with defiance. The call ended abruptly as she lowered the phone, her words drowned by the collective power of the room. She tried to justify her actions, to explain why she felt unsafe, but the truth was already laid bare. The class didn't buy it. Their loyalty, their belief, had shifted. What began as one teacher's prejudice had turned into a moment of unity, an entire classroom choosing to stand with Marcus against the injustice unfolding in front of them. In that instant, she wasn't the authority anymore. She was the one on trial. The classroom that once felt suffocating was now alive with defiance. The teacher's authority had shattered, replaced by the undeniable truth voiced by her own students. She lowered her phone, her excuses faltering against the weight of dozens of eyes staring back with disappointment and disbelief. The silence that followed wasn't respect, it was condemnation. Marcus sat still, a mixture of relief and exhaustion washing over him. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't fought back, and yet justice had arrived, not from the system, not from authority, but from those around him who refused to let prejudice win. For the first time in that long, harrowing hour, he felt seen. The incident didn't end there. Word spread quickly, videos captured on phones, whispers echoing through hallways, parents demanding answers. The teacher who once held power now faced questions she couldn't escape. And Marcus, once made to feel like a threat, became a symbol of strength, proof that silence doesn't have to be permanent, that courage can spread like wildfire. Beneath the small victory lingered a heavier truth. Marcus knew this wasn't an isolated moment. For countless others, there wouldn't be a classroom full of voices rising in defense. Too many stories like his end, differently, quietly, tragically, unseen, and that is what makes this story matter. It forces us to ask, how many more times will prejudice be disguised as safety? How many more voices will be silenced before the world finally listens? Because in the end, it wasn't authority that defined justice in that classroom, it was unity. And unity, when it speaks loud enough, has the power to change everything.